from Montreal. I'm currently an educator, as well as I'm doing my master's currently in educational policies at the University of Alberta.
Awesome. My name is Adriana, and I currently live in Sicily, but I also call Romania home, and Edmonton / Amisquachi Waskahikan, Treaty 6, where I lived for about 22 years. And I'm wrapping up my PhD in the Faculty of Education at the U of A in language education specifically.
And to round up the 3 time zones, I am Lucie. I am currently working as a French teacher at the Vancouver International School in West Vancouver, and I live, work, and play on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people.
Oh, Lébassé, you're on mute.
Sorry. Okay. Yes, so it all started last summer. As we all know, the year 2020 has been a year of transformation, unlearning, growth, and has put us in various unsettled situations and moments of reflection. And when we began our journey, we were still puzzled by what role we had and how we could use our voice in sharing what we've witnessed and our experiences with racism and our experience as educators wanting to create change in our classrooms through art or through language as well. So not knowing where our artistic processes would lead, we went on to engage in this walking and art making discovery, which led us to many powerful conversation exchanges, tears, and at the end, the rewarding sense of growth and many questions still unanswered.
Mm-hmm. So this all resulted in a published paper that actually should be out this week through the Journal of Canadian Curriculum Studies, or JCACS. And they were doing a special issue on walking, and specifically how walking kind of attunes us to the earth, to the environment, to ourselves. And so we thought this would be a really great fit for what we're doing. So we'd love to get some audience participation, if possible. Write in the chat what you think might be the connections between walking, art making, and anti-racism work. What kind of connections, Lian, do you see there for yourself? Because, I mean, for us, like Lébassé said, when we started, we really had no idea what would emerge. And I think that's true of every artistic process, but we always listen, right? We listen to our surroundings, to our bodies, to each other. So we would often go on walks and talk on the phone to each other or record voice messages. And we'll each speak to our individual artistic process, because we did a whole range of things, from printmaking to collage to photography to mixed media work. So we kind of were combining these processes. So I'm excited to hear in the chat or to read what you think walking, art making, and anti-racism may have in common. Let's see if anyone takes us up. Oh, thank you. Yeah, good. Perfect. Public art and who gets represented. Yeah. Modes of study always involve making cuts, what to include and exclude in our questions and methods. Absolutely. But it involves attunement to some things and the disappearance of other things. Thank you, Jessie. So now I guess we'll hop into our individual art processes, and Lébassé will kind of guide us through her own art process in this.
Right. So like Adriana said at the beginning, the whole purpose of the exploration and the journey was to explore how does transformation happen, and how are we able to reconnect with preconceived ideas or any experiences that might have led to internalizations. And in my case, the beginning of the journey started with realizing, reconnecting with an artwork I had made when I was in grade 1. So long story short, I drew myself white in grade 1. So this image that you see that I'm sharing right now is a self-portrait that I did. And my parents have always kept our projects and artwork, and over the years, these images and these drawings have always been in my environment around. We would always sit and look at them and kind of just be happy that we have all of these items from the past that we can always go and revisit. But it was not until June 2020, as I started the journey of transformation through the walking pedagogy, that it just dawned on me that I had drawn myself white. So it's kind of interesting to think that it took me 30 years to notice the colors that I have chosen to present myself. So the question that I was asking then are, is this a self-portrait or of internalized racism, or color blindness rendering me invisible to my own self? And growing up in the 90s in Quebec was a time where you were not the only Black student in the classroom in the 90s, but you often were still engaged in languages where the dominant discourse was mostly favoring whiteness. So if we were talking about coloring or portraiture, the color that you would have to choose would be skin color. So in my case, I chose skin color, which was not my actual skin color, but the color of the dominant group in this case. So the questions that I came to ask myself were in terms of how the teacher could have used this as an opportunity to maybe I don't know, like I still have a lot of questions. Should my grade 1 teacher have brought it up? Did she not see my color? Because there was also the concept of multiculturalism, which led to the sentiment of celebration of color blindness. So growing up, not being racist meant not seeing color. Did she not see me? There's also this idea of Blackness that renders you invisible in the group. Or how come I never noticed until now? So I also, as much as I am victim of color blindness, I'm also perpetrating this color blindness to myself and to people around me. And it led me to wonder, what else have I internalized? There's also a little bit of misogyny that could also be internalized growing up in our system. So, which led me to the idea of having to flip the frame. So all of this, these conversations, these reflections eventually lead you to kind of exorcise that, the trauma. And in a way to exorcise the trauma, you kind of have to take over and recreate a new frame. So flipping the frame, it was a way for me to practice self-inclusion. So a lot of time we talk about inclusion, but it was an inclusion that I was not going to wait until people let me in, but I was going to let myself in on my own. So the creation of personally reflective artwork offers students a chance to dismantle internalized stereotypes by formulating images and stories that offer resolutions and outcomes. So this all started with a trip to IKEA. We were walking outside a lot, and one day I decided I'm gonna go for a walk in IKEA, because it's just, you walk forever in that store. And as I was leaving, I noticed that, because the last stop is where all the artwork is, and I was thinking, it reminded me of that drawing that I drew. And I said, I want to reclaim this. I want to reframe this, and I want to take ownership. So flipping the frame is me using various mediums. So there was oil pastels, watercolors. I'm painting over the face of the subject in here. So I have a step-by-step of how do you flip the frame so you get lost. Explore your favorite big box store. Select a mass-produced art print portraying only one racial perspective de l'expérience humaine. Trouve un miroir, look at yourself and see how beautiful you are. What color are you? Once you've answered the question in step 3, select the medium of your choice and find the color that will now become skin color. Applique la couleur sur le visage du sujet. N'oublie pas les doigts. So I also incorporated aspects of my parents' culture. So this is another frame that I had. This is un pagne africain. So I repurposed again some of the fabrics into the artwork. Go back to the mirror you used in step 3. Quelle texture does your hair have? Is your hair short, crépus, ou long? And again, kind of infuse yourself into the artwork. If you didn't see yourself in that artwork, now is the chance for you to put yourself in this image. So that's another one here that I did. Policies of enlightenment by themselves do not necessarily lead to radical transformations of power structures. So yeah, so that was my journey of exploration and transformation.
Thank you, Lébassé. So it's actually, as you'll see as we go forward, and as we've introduced already, this has been such a collaborative process. So even if we have our own sections, we were working together through text, through very long-winded, but somehow we found our way, voice recordings, we would go on virtual walks together, that kind of thing. And actually Lébassé and I had the luck and the chance to meet up actually physically at the end of the summer when the pandemic wasn't so bad. And we've really exchanged, I really have appreciated how much I've learned from both of you. So thank you so much. So here you see an image of each one of the sections inside of my own part of the paper. So in terms of process, when I was thinking about this project, like most things, my thoughts were very messy. And so the process has been really messy too. The process has been different for each one, and also for walks and reflections that I have experienced, I have done, but did not make the paper themselves. So let's see. Yes, thank you, Lébassé. So my first one is Into the Forest, and I decided to go out. I live in the West End in Vancouver, so really sandwiched between downtown, concrete jungle and Stanley Park. And so I decided to lose myself in the forest, essentially. And that is really exactly what I did. So as the forest breathes, I find a fallen tree overgrown by heavy moss, overlapping ferns and new growth. I snap a few photos before I stand immobile. Being still suddenly makes my surroundings feel overwhelming. It is easy to be afraid of living things. Mosquitoes swerve around my exposed calves. Crows caw above. The forest surrounds and intimidates. A crack. I look up to meet the gaze of a masked creature with small human-like hands, only a few steps away. I hurriedly flee the scene. So with this experience, it was in the summertime. I was just about to go back to school teaching, and definitely had a lot of anxiety around the pandemic and going back, and how to go back, and how it was going to be different this year. And so through the process of working through my anxieties, I've really come to realize the importance of a caring approach, so a caring pedagogy, and really prioritizing the relationships with our students first, and really tuning into who comes into our classroom every day. So with this one here, it looked like walking, and then as you see, I was really lost in Stanley Park. I was sitting down and I was writing, and then a raccoon came up to me. And so after that whole process, then I made the art afterwards. Now, rolling into the second part, coexistence, nous sommes complexes, nous sommes contradictoires. As I mentioned before, living between Stanley Park, this like incredible space of green and wildness, and then the concrete jungle, it just having an opportunity to walk through and really soak in not only the visual discrepancies between that, but also the experience is very striking. So complexities and contradictions exist in our spaces, as well as in the stories we construct about ourselves as a nation. When I come home from my walk, I attempt to replicate with overlapping rectangular stencils the geometrics of the urban and of the power structures it represents. Beneath the screen prints lie curvaceous lines formed from organically shaped magazine cutouts and seek to represent the living land and stories of its people, stories that resist confinement, stories that endure. Together, these distinct realities create my city and my nation. Next. Finally, my last piece was linguistic privilege. And this is a piece that really, it was probably, I mean, all pieces were very personal, but this was probably the most personal. So the reality was that my mother's mother tongue, le français, held official language status in this country. En tant qu'Albertaine francophone, dans mon milieu minoritaire, I could be educated, engage in extracurricular activities, and take part in a small but thriving community, all in my home language. I now see more clearly this linguistic and cultural privilege given to me over others. Looking back, I would tell my younger self that heritage language learners are subject to material and symbolic violence at the hands of the dominant societal groups. Such learners often have to deny their cultural identity and give up their languages as a necessary condition for success in the mainstream society. So as someone growing up in a bicultural family, my mom being French from France and my dad being Anglophone Canadian, I really had the privilege in Alberta to have access to these different services so that I could comfortably live a life in both of my mother tongues. And that is not the reality for most of our students. Can you go to the next slide, please, Lébassé? So as I was thinking about all of these ideas, these are some of the questions that I posed myself. How do I move forward as a language teacher of a colonial language, right, of French? How can I show up as an ambassador for all languages? What is the role of home language in my classroom, and how can it be celebrated? And how can I model proud multilingualism in my teaching and beyond? And one way we were doing that, the answer to that last question, modeling that proud multilingualism, I think all three of us were doing that in our paper. As you might have noticed, we've been weaving our different languages throughout this presentation and throughout the the paper as well. Can you move to the next slide, please? Awesome. So how does this show up in my teaching? So all of these images that you see on your screen are from this year. Really, I attribute these ideas and these learning engagements as a direct result from this whole walking art pedagogy reflective process with my fellow teammates. So as you can see here, just a couple of examples of how I've been really trying to show up in my classroom. So starting out the year with language profiles, the students were able to really have an opportunity to stop and to think about what languages are alive and well in my life, and maybe not alive and well, right? Maybe there's a language that they can't quite speak, but is still there. So what language do you think in? What language do you speak to your family and friends in? What language do you learn in? What language do you play in? So really trying to get the students to think about that, and then moving forward, pulling those languages into the rest of our language learning experience in my classroom. Another way I was doing that was accessing some Squamish language, because as I mentioned before, we are on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Coast Salish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and so we learned some simple Squamish words, and on top of that, we were doing I've really been trying to think about, okay, what are some learning outcomes that we have to do in general in class? For example, learn how to ask a question in French. Okay, great, but now how can we pull in Indigenous languages, their home language? So we did a whole a mini research project on different Indigenous languages around Canada, where students, this is a grade 5 example, students were able to find, sorry, my time's up. Yeah, so we were able, right, so the students were able to research different Indigenous languages. And then just next slide, and then I'm done, I promise. And then these are some examples of resources that I've been using in the classroom. So resources that come from people who look like my students, who look like different people from all around the Francophone world. I thought that was really important. And then also incorporating different lived experiences. So voilà. Merci beaucoup. Adriana.
Merci, Lucie. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for being here today. This was such a pleasure and an honor to do this work together with two of my best friends. And I see some of my other best friends in the audience, so yay. So let me start by saying that walking has, since childhood, kind of been my way to exercise, relax, reflect and process things, and daydream, and just be off of screens, these screens that have us captured the entire day. And exactly 1 year ago in Italy, we entered one of the most stringent lockdowns in all of Europe. So for 2 whole months, for 9 weeks, we were not allowed whatsoever to walk outside. And it was such an interesting thing to have walking, kind of taken away from you, walking prohibited, something that we take for granted every single day. And so, while I was kind of inside, I would just pace my apartment, just literally on the phone with Lébassé, Lucie, and other friends, and just kind of panicking, like, how can we move everything that we do, including teaching and research, especially with kids and youth and undergrads, online? And so it was through our conversations, and then once May and June came, once we were allowed to go outside again, I felt totally reinvigorated. So I would head out into my neighborhood. Can you go back a couple slides? Sorry. I would head out into Ballaron. Lébassé, can you go back a couple slides? Thank you. So I would go out into Ballaro, which is this really multicultural neighborhood in Palermo. And, you know, for the first time ever, I would like start noticing everything around me, all the languages, all the sounds, everything. And this was my artistic process, was taking photographs and writing, like ink shedding and writing poetry to kind of document what I saw and the conversations that I was having with Lucie and Lébassé. And later I would glue the Polaroids into my sketchbook, kind of like what I have here, and draw my walking paths in between, you know, all the places that I stopped. And I would also kind of write, again, like the questions that I had that emerged from that day. And of course, since oil and water don't mix, what emerges is this kind of bright mixed media experiment of this walking-based art practice. And I keep doing this every single day. I'm doing this even now because, again, it's how I process what's going on in the world and in my life. So if you can move one forward, Lébassé. So as we know, in June 2020, the world did not just deal with COVID-19, but two other suffocating pandemics, right? We have racism, we have the climate crisis, and I noticed the walls of Palermo change almost overnight. Once George Floyd was murdered, I saw almost instantly, about a block away from my house, this mural of him, and the words "I can't breathe" suddenly appeared, spray painted on the rocks near the Mediterranean Sea. And this is about 8,214 kilometers from where he was executed. And not just this, but many other instances of people. If you can move one forward, Lébassé. I'm not sure if you notice this young girl, or if you can see her. Her name is Winta Amor Rogers, and she was photographed in the United States, in New York City. And, you know, it's amazing how the world kind of simultaneously reacts. And also, Lébassé and I remarked one time on the phone how the walls of a city react much faster than schools do, than universities do, than really anybody. So this is, again, kind of the context we were working with. And as we walked and talked, and I do think the walking helped so much, because just talking on the phone is not the same as kind of walking and experiencing where you live and how your city is reacting to world events. I was thinking about so many things, including, you know, first of all, how has my identity as a non-Indigenous Romanka informed my understanding of teaching in Canada, curriculum, and why am I sometimes so unsettled when I reflect on the benefits that I've received from these deeply ingrained systems of white privilege and settler privilege that I benefited from for 22 years and even now. And can self-reflection even occur without discomfort? You know, we often try to create these safe spaces for learning, but we also really need discomfort to learn. And almost every day we were also discussing allyship and what does non-optical allyship look like, because we saw a lot of performative allyship from a lot of people, including some that were very hurtful. And this question is also something I'm thinking about constantly, is how can I embed social, racial, and linguistics justice throughout my curricula and teaching and research, and not just as add-ons or like an occasional theme that I touch upon. So really making sure that it's at the center of everything we do. And I'd like to add to that social, racial, linguistic justice, but also environmental justice, thinking of that and how walking attunes us to the climate crisis as well. And I added one last question here, which came up a lot in our conversations and through our art practice, was who actually gets to walk for leisure and creativity, right? Who feels harassed, followed, assaulted, or even killed when they walk, right? So recently I've had the experience of being followed while I walk, and that just changes everything, right? All of a sudden the walking is not a place where you can feel like you can reflect, but you enter like a fight or flight kind of thing. Next slide, please.
10 minutes left.
Oh, thank you. Okay, great. So on one of my walks, I noticed several graffiti pieces that I hadn't noticed before, but it reminded me of this phrase that we have heard in COVID-19, which is, oh, we're all in the same boat, like we're all experiencing this pandemic. And so as a kind of reaction to that, I made this piece, which is non siamo tutti sulla stessa barca, because we are absolutely not in the same boat. And I think of Sicily and the privilege that I have to live here, but also the thousands of migrants that arrive to this island on boats that are falling apart, and they often have to be rescued. So again, like walking attuned me to things that I often, it's not that I don't think about, but it's like, it brings it to the forefront of my mind. One more, Lébassé. And yeah, how can we do justice to this new curriculum of breath, of bones, of steps, of screen, of protest? So I'd like to end with, if you go one more, Lébassé. Oh. Yes, I'd like to end with just giving you a tangible example of kind of what changed in me transformationally. I kind of put all of our thoughts and conversation into practice when I taught a 4-week summer camp for Spanish heritage language learners. And in this camp, I made sure to put protest art at the very center of everything. So, and what really surprised me, these kids, I had 9 participants. They're 13 to 17 years old. And what shocked me is when we did our walking, did our art making, they came up with probably a list of like 50 things that they really care deeply about, including racism, including environmental destruction, trans rights, LGBTQ rights, mental health. And I think with my original curriculum, I don't think this would have happened because I was kind of going a different direction. And once I kind of went back and really tried to focus on the right here, the right now, what's running through all of these kids' heads, just like what's running through all of our heads. These are some of the examples of the artworks that that they created. So yes, I think we're gonna wrap up, and I think, yes, one more thing is caminante, no hay camino, se hace camino al andar. We really never know the path, right? Walker, there's no path. The path is made by walking, and that goes for art, teaching, and walking, right? So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Adriana, Lébassé, Lucie. Thank you. Like, your presentations were so inspirational. You touched my heart, and I don't know. I have so many things to say, but we'll leave the floor for the ones who have any questions for you. Now there's a message from Sophie, thanking all.
Merci Sophie d'être là. Amazing.
And yeah, and there was a comment from me at the beginning when you asked what's the relationship between walking and art making and then anti-racist. So I was like, walking means moving forward. You don't know how, you just move forward. Because this is life. It's about pushing yourself and moving forward. And I thought about art making. It's about being creative, being different. And sometimes like being different is not easy. It's so challenging because society would look at you as an outsider or something. And anti-racist is, we need to move forward, and we need to be creative and to think critically so we can face these issues like racism. We have to embrace, and we have to understand that this is an ugly reality that we all live in the whole world, and we have to face it. We have to do lots of things, especially in education, to keep going, because at the end we are all one, we are all human beings, we are all share this world that we live in, so we have to be like a global family. I know this global thing is a bit misused, but we have to do it. And thank you from deep down my heart, really, three of you.
Thank you.
Mary, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Jessie, and thank you, all you three. It really touched my heart. I was, just asking the question, I guess Naveen answered it. I was just about to ask you, why did you choose walking? Why walking? Why not something different? So that was my question. And when, while Naveen was talking, I think I got my answer.
Thank you, Mary.
Lébassé, Lucie, do you want to add anything as to why walking?
Well, I guess the walking part came first, right? Because we had this opportunity with the paper, the proposal from JCACS. They had the idea of the walking, and Adriana can speak more to this because she came to us in mid-June last year with an idea of how to incorporate all of it within the walking framework. Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, I was actually reading Jessie Byers' work, who is here right now. And Jessie talks about this idea that art is like a dehabituating force. And I thought walking is honestly very, very similar. Like walking can also act like art in the sense that it helps us like really openly feel things viscerally, question things, protest. Like when we walk in protest, that's a very powerful way to walk, and really like reimagine things. I don't know about you all here, but you can share in the chat. But for me, like walking is like what I do. And so I thought also for Lucie and Lébassé, that can also, be quite fruitful in there. And I know Lucie walks a lot and Lébassé also. So it seemed like an obvious kind of choice for research, even though we don't see it enough.
We have a question from Jessie. Please go ahead.
Hello, nice to see you all, and Adrian and Emily and other people.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have a question. I just want to say that I loved, your ability to kind of think through these things separately, but also collectively is what I wanted to comment on, because I think right now there's so much, and your comments, Adriana, about like being in this together, we're in this together. On the one hand, people are experiencing different things, but on the other hand, we're entangled in all sorts of ways, like you show from across the globe. And so I'm really appreciating the work that you're doing, even in terms of like a scholarly project, because I think in so many spaces we've been trained to work individually through things, and that's not only like alienating and isolating, but also makes it hard to resist, because individual action, although we might recycle harder or consume more ethically, I think until there's this like collective resistance that this is the thing, and then how do we collectively resist when so many of the systems work to kind of put us against each other, even, or in terms of individuality. And academia is the best example of that. So I think you're doing not just like incredible pedagogy, which all of you showed in your work in different ways, which I love, like really kind of like specific examples, but I think by working together, you're also, and authoring together and like messing things up between each other. I think that that's a mode of resistance as well. And it's uncomfortable, but also maybe can take us places where we've never gone before. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you, Jessie.
Thanks for your presentations.
Thank you. And like you said, the academic space is indeed very, very hard. and even the publishing experience was quite interesting. So, but all throughout this process, I've been so grateful. So if any of my co-authors want to say anything, Lébassé, do you want to say anything now at the end, or Lucie? I don't want to put you on the spot, but.
No, just thank you. Thank you so much for everyone here today, for being receptive, and we hope that, to Jesse's point, we can all kind of walk forward together and think about these ideas as we turn off our screens today. Yeah.
Yeah, let's all go for a walk.
Oh, I wish we still have a long day.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Walk and listen. Thank
really,
you.
we enjoyed it, and looking forward for more projects from the three of you. And stay safe and connected, please. And see you, hopefully, till we meet again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for all of the attendees.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
So hello, everyone. I will start getting prepared on my side so that I can present.
Tiffany, you're in your home, so I have no words to welcome you. You're just like one of my best classmates, your friend. Tiffany is one of the co-chairs. She always works hard, and now she's presenting a very interesting topic, United States student debt crisis, neoliberalism and debt enslavement. So the floor is yours.
Yes, I've been, going around, and my head has been, detached from my body. I've been like a chicken running around, trying to make sure that volunteers, the presentations are going on. But now I'm going to take a step back from that and present my paper, The United States Student Debt Crisis, but I'll wait until 2.
Yeah, all the best, friend.
Thank you.
Tiffany, should I join any other room for help, or?
No, please stay here and you can time keep for me.
All right.
Is that okay?
Oh, thank you.
Hello, everyone. So I will get started since it's about 2. So thank you all for attending my paper presentation on the topic, the United States Student Debt Crisis, Neoliberalism and Debt Enslavement. My name is Tiffany Matraxia. I'm a second-year MA student in the Department of Education at Concordia University. And this paper is for my directed study for graduation. And my supervisor is David Waddington. During this presentation, the main points of my research, which shall be addressed, include an introduction to the student debt crisis, discussing why it is important to research the social effects of the student debt crisis, my research questions, then I will briefly present the paper's framework, my literature review, which presents the dominant rhetoric constructed by conservative arguments on the student debt crisis. Then I will define neoliberalism as a cultural hegemony, present an overview of Blaker's arguments that student debt is a form of enslavement. And finally, I will end this presentation with a call to action and concluding remarks. A student can borrow up to $138,500 from the federal government during their academic career, which is their undergrad and graduate degrees. As borrowing increases for students pursuing higher educational studies, so does the United States student debt portfolio. As of 2020, the federal student loan portfolio has reached a high of $1.6 trillion. On average, $31,000 in student debt is owed per household. Tuition rates have also continued to increase, as the figure on the right specifies. Since 1987, you can see the cost for attending a public school costs a student around $3.2 thousand for 4 years, while private, nonprofit costs $15,000 for 4 years. Then you can see that tuition has steadily risen to $10,000 for public in 2017 and 2018, and $34.7 thousand for private. In the past 23 years, the cost of higher education has risen 2 times faster than the cost of healthcare and 4 times faster than inflation. So what? Why is it important for researchers to question the social implications of rising student debt in the United States? Well, with the rise of tuition and debt, an increase in default rates have followed. To go into default means graduate students have fallen behind 90+ days on repaying their monthly amount or interest on their loans. As of 2020, 8 million Americans are in default on their loans. If you look at the figure on the right, which indicates the rise in interest rates for borrowers in default, the interest in student loan default has risen to 11.5%, which is higher than any interest such as mortgage, credit card, and auto. Ultimately, what can also happen to a student who are facing default rates is they can experience crippling add-on fees, wage garnishment, tax refund seizures, and suspensions of occupational licenses. Therefore, to go into default can be detrimental for a student borrower and can extend repayment of their student loans. Because of the blatantly negative social outcomes of student debt on American student borrowers, I felt very strongly about researching and understanding the student debt crisis in terms of power dynamics. Therefore, the questions I found myself gravitating towards were: 1, what aspects of conservative arguments support a dominant ideological perception of the student debt crisis? 2, what is the end goal, objective, or class interest behind influencing the American public's perception of student debt? Lastly, I wanted to question, is there a way we can disrupt the preceding belief that pursuing higher educational studies relatively means you have an obligation to acquire massive amounts of debt? To conduct my research, I have used a Marxist framework. Therefore, throughout the analysis of student debt, I incorporated Marxist theories of ideology, class interests, and class exploitation. However, due to limited time, I will not delve too deep into these theories. Pertaining to my first research question, what aspects of conservative arguments support a dominant ideological perception of the student debt crisis? The objective was to conduct a literature review on conservative arguments surrounding the student debt crisis in order to formulate the dominant ideology. As such, I will present three main conservative arguments in the next 3 slides. So the first argument, which shall be discussed, is the claim that the federal loan services are inefficient in handling a loan portfolio of $1.6 trillion. 2 Republican US representatives have voiced their concerns during the 2019 Financial Service Committee meeting. In their testimonies, they argued that the federal loan service that should not be in the business of direct lending and that the private sector is more equipped in handling student debt. Also, Dobson in her paper argued that the federal loan categories and repayment options that are available to the borrower are too complex and unsystematic for the average borrower. And thus she claims that a student, because of the poor federal management of student loans by the federal government, gets lost in the sea of loan options. The next argument, which formulates the dominant rhetoric, is the claim that poor student borrowing decisions is another factor causing the rise in student debt. Marco's 2019 study examined the interconnectedness between student preparedness and student debt. Her findings suggest that the general public lacks financial literacy, which is the ability to practice rational borrowing. Based on her findings, she believes that students should conduct a cost/benefits analysis on the amount of debt they will need to complete their studies, while Ankers and Chingos argue that student debt should be used as a tool solely by economically rational individuals who are financially literate and understand the risk of borrowing. Overall, these arguments claim that it is necessary that students acquire the correct information on the loan process, that they also take into account the needs of the economy, that they understand labor market outcomes, while also making informed decisions and taking risks like entrepreneurs in order to function as a citizen in our modern day society. The final argument my research examined in order to construct the dominant rhetoric surrounding the student debt crisis is the claim that universities are making education too democratic by permitting diverse student population in terms of race, social status, and educational level, and that these universities are letting this dynamic population to study their desired subjects. Thus, this argument directly blames university as a factor of rising tuition rates. They argue that diverse students require more added services, which results in the need to rise the cost of education. They also argue that universities are slow to adapt their curriculum to meet market needs, and that they are not preparing students for the job market. Instead, they speculate that these institutions are allowing too many students to pursue worthless degrees, thus are in need of restructuring. In my research, I deconstructed these arguments by defining neoliberalism along with adding a literature review incorporating researchers who critique the dominant rhetoric surrounding the student debt crisis. I will not delve too deep into the other side of the argument. However, I will present a brief discussion on neoliberalism. Neoliberalism sits on 3 pillars. 1, the benevolence of the free market. 2, minimal state intervention and regulation of the economy. 3, the individual as an economic actor. And 3, the individual as an economic actor. Through my analysis on the conservative arguments, I found that conservative arguments are directly blaming the student debt crisis on public institutions and the average citizen. As such, these arguments are constructing a cultural hegemony that places the needs of the market above public welfare.
Ten minutes left.
Thank you. To inquire into my final research question, what is the social end goal stemming from the neoliberal ideology? My paper concentrated on Blaker's argument that student debt is a form of enslavement. In Blaker's book, The Falling Rate of Learning and the Neoliberal Endgame, he claims that student debt supports the top 1% interests. He argued that capitalism, due to the competition factor of capitalism, are required to augment labor and pursue innovation in order to accumulate capital. He argues that due to this need for labor augmentation, collective labor bargaining power decreases and the need to gain a higher educational degree becomes a necessity. Thus, students get entrapped in a system where they must pursue higher education, ultimately resulting in public indebtment. He further claims that this system of debt resembles a feudalistic system, but instead of owning rent to landowners and to gain access to the means of production to farm the land, students now owe money against their being because this debt is existential, so it cannot be separated. As Marlene Jennings was saying, it cannot be separated from our minds. So this debt that we owe is against ourselves and our future selves. And this debt is ultimately owned by large corporations and banks. Blaker argues that this system of enslavement results in a motivated workforce whose only goal, because of the amount of debt that they have accumulated, their only goal is to succeed in the job market to ultimately pay back their loans. Thus, this system ultimately benefits capitalists and not the general public. Ultimately, capitalists are eating having their cake and eating it too, so to say. To conclude this research presentation, we must end with a call to action. Millions of Americans are suffering and facing prolonged debt due to going into default. There is a dominant narrative which is convoluting the discussion by placing blame on public institutions and the borrowers. Blaker, he takes a radical approach to eliminating the student debt crisis because he supports the many movements to forego higher educational tuition altogether. He says that it's not enough to forgive the student debt that has been accumulated by the population, which Joe Biden is suggesting to do. He says that's not enough. We need to go farther and get rid of higher tuition for everyone. So to forgive the the student debt that has been accumulated and to make tuition free. Ultimately, he calls for a revolution based on a moral stance that debt bondage is unjust and undemocratic. His solution is to make tuition free for everyone. And he says this will only cost American taxpayers $6 billion a year, which is less than what a taxpayer and the federal government invest in corporate bailouts. My stance on the student debt crisis is that we need to continue to question, does neoliberalism actually support the interests of all US citizens, or is it more just supporting corporations? And because we need to question this because millions are suffering. So I urge everyone to continue this critical discussion and comprehend the impact of dominant ideologies in our understanding of the student debt crisis. Thank you so much, everyone. The paper presentation has now concluded, and I will be taking any questions you might have regarding my presentation.
We have a question from Samantha.
Yes, Samantha.
Hi, Tiffany. Thanks for your presentation. So my question is kind of about the kind of class framework that you use. So you're using the kind of very orthodox framework, not taking into consideration kind of that as the economy changed throughout the 20th century, we have, now a new class of people, right? That we have the PMCs. So I was wondering how you think about the way that given that in the States, only about 30% of Americans 25 and older have a college degree or will go to college, Is there a way to think about the project of like subsidizing higher education as, you know, it's a PMC class project against the working class, right? It's asking the working class to subsidize the reproduction of basically their managers and educated professionals. So if you have this goal of like to make this, you make the moral case for it, right? But is there class politics? There is no broad class support for this, right? So what is your argument about making this into like a set of class politics for PMCs? Because that's basically what it is. So you'll have 30% of the country who benefits from this, and the rest of Americans are supposed to, what, subsidize this? So I'm just curious, like, how do you see this being a viable political thing?
Okay, so Samantha, if I'm understanding your question, and thank you so much for raising this question. What you're saying is that if we were to make tuition free, completely free for all Americans, you're saying that it would be in the class interest of the working class, and it would cost the corporations money. Is that how I'm understanding it?
No, the opposite. So obviously this is based on income tax, right? So the vast majority of Americans would be asked to subsidize the education of a small group of elites, right? Because in our current economy, we already have, you know, overproduction of college people with college degrees. Like we already have way too many people with college degrees than the economy can absorb, which is why you get people with college degrees working at Starbucks, right? So my question is basically like, you can make the moral case for it, but it's not politics, right?
Yeah. No, I
so
understand.
what do you know, because I hear this argument all the time, right? So I'm just curious, like, how do you address that it's like a political dead end?
I think it's very difficult to address this because I am making the moral stance that it is unjust that millions of Americans are suffering because they have a degree that cost them X amount of money. And what you were saying, that we currently have too many high individuals who have these degrees and they're winding up in Starbucks. So it is kind of a dead end. I would need to do a lot more research to make a political stance, because my paper was more looking at a moral stance. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Just curious.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you, Tiffany. It was great.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. It was really great, and the number of the money you just it's like less than the bailouts they did. It was like, what?
Yeah, the same here.
Yeah. My sister, she has graduated from her master's. She's got her degree in the United States. She's been outside of higher education for 8 years, and she still owes $200,000 in debt. Wow. And she is unable to pay it back. It's affecting her life. And it's just, I just don't think it's right that so many people should be struggling if they have gotten this degree.
Yeah.
I prefer not to study.
Yeah, they're not following nobody to be left behind. It's just like, it's just a logo. They keep talking about
the No Child Left Behind.
Oh yeah, it's like it seems that so many people are left behind. That's the truth.
I mean, I don't actually know that the people who get expensive college degrees are the people who are left behind, right? Like, I don't think that is necessarily the case. Like, where I come from, most people don't get college degrees, and, you know, they actually are left behind. Like, the idea that they have no significant cultural power, nobody listens to, frankly, what they think or what they want, right? And I find it, I think it's hard pill to swallow for the vast majority of Americans for whom to tell them, like, oh, these are these people who got fancy degrees, they're deep in debt, and you need to bail them out. I think that's a hard argument to make to, like, the vast majority of working class Americans Just say that, right? And yes, there are lots of mostly millennials, right, who have like crushing student loan debt. I don't know though that the solution is like, let's have the working class who's been decimated since the 1970s to say, okay, you get to subsidize these people's education.
I mean, Samantha, I would, if we're making a political discussion about this, I would push for raising taxes for the very wealthy, make them, pay for subsidizing higher education. But I'm not in politics, so I don't have the right answer on how to fix what is happening in the United States in terms of student debt. Thank you, everyone. So it looks like we're out of time. Thank you for your questions. I really appreciate it. This was a directed study paper. I am just in my master's, so I will need to conduct more research to get an overview of everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Best in your DS and everything.
That's wonderful, Tiffany, especially if you're talking about some master's thesis. That's amazing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So Naveen, I'm gonna leave the room, go to the lobby if you don't need anything right now. To ask Tiffany if she needs me more. Should I stay here?
If she doesn't ask you, so yeah, just stay here. Unless she wants you, so she's gone.
So let me ask her, and then I can rejoin the room.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Hi, Sydney. Good afternoon.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Good.
We're so glad having you here with us on board.
Yeah, I'm excited.
For your contribution and everything. And we still have 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You can go ahead and if you want to prepare your PowerPoint. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, it just says that host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if I need to be made.
Sydney, you have to go back to the main room lobby and Tiffany would assign you to be a co-host.
Okay.
Thank you, Sydney. Hey, Leila.
And we'll talk about the plan itself. So as we know, one of the first institutions to shut down during the COVID-19 pandemic were schools, and children's advocates, pediatricians, teachers, child psychologists, and parents. All of these people became engaged in debates about where children should be during the pandemic. Oh, can I just switch here? There we go. And so reports started to be released by Sick Kids and the Center for Disease Control that kind of said that children were not at a large risk for COVID-19, but they were more likely to be negatively impacted by isolation and stagnancy and in-home conflict that stemmed from being at home 24 hours a day. So parents kind of agreed with these reports, saying that they were really concerned for their children's mental and physical health. And the Ontario government really picked up on these reports and concerns and announced that governments would be able to choose if their child, or guardians would be able to choose if their child would return to school in September or not. Through all of this, a very important voice was missing, which was the voice of children themselves, right? So under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which was ratified in Canada in 1991, Articles 12 and 13 guarantee children the right to express their views freely in all matters affecting them, and that those views are given weight and taken seriously. So I have the articles there for you to read, they're kind of long. So drawing on the Ontario government's back to school plan, I'll demonstrate how the neoliberal and developmentalist framing of the back to school plan undermines and corrupts children's expression rights that are guaranteed in Articles 12 and 13 of the UNCRC. So the silencing of children and their voices during the COVID-19 pandemic really occurs on this basis of the idea that adults and children are in a binary, right? So adults are seen as capable of making rational decisions and children are seen as immature or vulnerable or passive, which leads them to require others to make their decisions for them. So by neglecting to use a rights-based approach to policy and programming, the Ontario government missed a really vital opportunity to ensure that children are not only being heard, but respected as full human beings with valid and integral experiences. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted a lot of the ways that governments and institutions have failed to meet the needs of their populations. So we're starting to see these kind of deep and sharp economic recessions that are resulting and demonstrating that a neoliberal political economic system is just incapable of handling a health pandemic due to heavy focus on profit and competition, even when so many members of the population became unemployed. And a lot of the global infrastructure that was in place to absorb crisis or emergency had been defunded during the previous 4 decades of neoliberalism, as neoliberalism discourages unnecessary government involvement in favor of individual responsibility and insurance. So governments are scrambling to maintain legitimacy as they attempt to balance these economic and public health concerns. The neoliberal responses to COVID-19 have really been ineffectual, causing a lot of detriments for members of vulnerable groups, including children. The COVID-19 pandemic can kind of offer us an opportunity to consider the ways that neoliberalism is corrupting our capacity to exist together and maintaining the health and well-being of all humans. Most of the data surrounding COVID-19 does not address children specifically. Early data suggests that about 2 to 5% of COVID-19 cases were children, but it's unclear whether this low transmission and response was initially due to school closures or if it's a biological response based on age. So there's kind of a debate about that. So because few children were tested and recorded in the early days of the pandemic, experts began to express concerns with how children were impacted by stay-at-home orders. Some of these reports highlighted maybe some positive effects that could come, like new skills, closer bonds, between parents and children, but many of the reports focused on the really drastic impacts of isolation and school closures on children. So these reports combine the notion that children are less likely to face severe effects and the concerns about mental and physical health of children, and recommended that schools be reopened, again, without asking children for input on that. So as schools opened, it really became clear that children are not immune to the virus and they do face transmission in schools. These reports are really written from this kind of developmental perspective that is based on like what childhood should look like and what kind of behaviors they should be exhibiting at a particular age. They also kind of make the argument that schools are wholly safe places for children where homes are sites of danger. So the decision to return to school without considering the voices and opinions of children was a huge misstep by all experts and officials involved. They draw on concerns for children and where they should be, and yet they are at once claiming to act in the best interest of the child while simultaneously denying any collective representation or opportunity for civic participation for young people. And those types of collective representation or opportunities usually come from participating in school, but without being in school, children were basically extremely silenced on all levels. So the lack of disaggregated data for children's transmission is itself a function of the silencing of children more broadly. concerns that children have and the issues that they face are not represented statistically. Policymakers are left making decisions without a complete picture. And this is a significant social problem that has been identified before because children are seen as dependents on families who make their decisions for them and better understand their best interests. Children are thought not to be credible, and thus are usually spoken about rather than spoken to. So children are missing from discussions of COVID-19, and the impact of COVID-19 is mostly inferred rather than explored, even though governments and institutions are drawing on these inferred impacts as fact. So this has a really detrimental effect for children and for public health, as decisions that are kind of negotiating between a deadly virus and mental health can really mean the decision between life and death for some children and families, and it continues the marginalization of children as a social group. So this paper is grounded in a childhood lens that is critical of developmental approaches to childhood that kind of over-rely on an understanding of childhood as a journey that leads towards like a full humanness. So childhood is often defined in relation to adulthood using this deficit model. So adults are seen as rational, strong, capable, and stable. Children are viewed as like unfinished or incomplete, and they lack these characteristics, but they will one day develop them. So the continuous focus on looking forward and shaping the future really misses the child that exists in the present and contributes to the idea that children cannot exercise rights and responsibilities due to their incompetency. Instead, children and their development should be protected as they're seen as vulnerable people, right? So significant departure from this model occurred in 1991 with the new sociology of childhood. So this is not really new to us anymore, as it's been 30 years, but we can still draw from and expand on our insights about treating children as social actors who are impacted by and also impact the world around them. These insights have been essential in developing a rights approach to childhood where children are recognized as full bearers of rights and responsibilities. Using this model, we can interrogate the way that childhood has been defined by incompleteness and recognize that children are wholly and fully human and should be treated as such. Understanding children's experiences and voices can provide very important sources of information about the world in which we reside. A human rights approach to childhood implies taking seriously the experiences and lives of children as full humans. So the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which I've already mentioned, was drafted in 1989 and has been really widely ratified. So Kennelly highlights a framework for just broadly understanding it, so kind of as an introduction. So 3 Ps, 4 guiding principles, 3 Ps being provision, participation, and protection, 4 guiding principles referring to non-discrimination, best interests of the child, life survival and development, and respect for the views of the child. So every article of the UNCRC fits in one or more of these categories. And so it's important to note that none of these articles can stand alone, but all of these children's rights are intertwined and interdependent. When we are creating policy using a child's rights lens, this is kind of a model that Lundy has highlighted here. So any policy that has potential to impact children in childhood should be made to align with the children's rights framework that we're all kind of bound by. So using this rights framework can allow us to work towards a more just and equal society and develop the capacity of rights bearers. So policy should involve children in the development and implementation. So these are just 6 guidelines principles. Policy is directly and intentionally aligned with children's rights process. Policy and actual impacts are assessed and evaluated. Participation, so children are involved in policy processes. Public spending, so a maximum amount of resources are spent on the realization of children's rights. And then publicity, so that policies are made available for young people to access and understand. So this framework kind of shows us how to properly make policy that works for children. And so the Ontario government really neglected to use any type of this rights framework when they were doing their back to school planning, which was again a vast misstep and led to the silencing of children. So the expression rights are of significant importance as they view the child as a full human capable of participating in society with integrity. However, the way that expression rights have been applied is really inconsistent with the way that they're written. They depend on adults listening to children and kind of bringing those ideas into the world. So drawing on the adult-child binary, adults might be hesitant to listen to and take seriously the opinions of children due to the idea that they're incapable or they're immature. And then there's also this potential for undermining adult authority. So using this framework, I suggest that the Ontario government's back to school plan just denied children these expression rights, contributed to their consistent marginalization in society, as well as reinforced ideas about childhood and children where governments, parents, and all of these experts know more about children's experiences than children themselves. So this assumption draws on that developmentalist approach where children are kind of viewed as incomplete. And then they focus on restarting the economy, getting parents back to work rather than valuing children's experiences. So grounding policy in a rights respecting approach ensures that children's rights will be respected and their experiences are valued. So I also drew on Shore and Wright's Anthropology of Policy, which just examines how policy is embedded in social worlds and brings into being these new spaces, relations, subjects, and meanings. So policy, it's recognizing the idea that policy is always drafted with a purpose, and analyzing policy can see the way that governments and institutions kind of regulate the people that that are their citizens. So in June of 2020, the Ontario government released their written plan for children's return to school in September. So the plan stressed that attendance for in-person schooling would be voluntary and that parents would be able to choose whether they would allow their child to enter the physical school building. The part of the government's plan that kind of received the most emphasis from Premier Doug Ford and Minister of Education Stephen Lecce is that parents have a choice in their manner that their child receives schooling. And they repeatedly state this. Parents are able to choose, the government will respect your choices, blah, 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 blah. And they also state that they want to help parents make the best and most informed decision. So even though they're making all of these kind of grand gestures about choice, the choice is severely limited by structural forces and kind of the discourses that the government is drawing on. So the Ontario government uses these like popular, developmental, and neoliberal discourses that really express concern for children, as well as concern for the economy. So alongside the information about returning to school, they say like it's kind of essential to get children back in school so they don't miss out on learning or fall behind, while also suggesting that it's necessary for parents to utilize this free form of childcare to get back to work. So Ford states, as more regions of Ontario are reopening and more parents are headed back to work, return to school is on our minds. I know it hasn't been easy for students being away from school, not seeing your friends, and missing out on extracurricular activities. So we can hear in his direct statement how he's packaging these concerns for children right alongside the reopening of the economy. So these discourses suggest that if children are not in school, they and the society as a whole will face severe effects as a consequence. So by presenting the return to school as necessary for economic functioning and child development, parents should make the rational and responsible decision to place their child in school and return to work, whether this is stated explicitly or not. So even if you were to feel that the rational choice would be to keep your child in the home, many families were unable to make this choice. So here, children are just presented as a burden and a cost for families. And the choice is for parents to make. The information is geared towards parents, again, because of that construction of adulthood as being rational and autonomous. Children are not asked to contribute to making the choice. So while the government is mobilizing these concerns about children, the child is missing from that discussion and is presented as this passive object that should be spoken about rather than spoken with. So interventions are made for their best interests, where their best interest is mostly to become this rational and productive citizen. So the plan effectively responsibilizes parents, but it also silences children. The government takes this like empathetic stance that suggests that we're all in this together. Even as the government is stating that they respect the right to choose, adults are kind of forced to make this choice among limited choices that are influenced by these structural and discursive factors. And children are just outright excluded from the decision-making process unless their parents kind of pulled them in. So in regard to the pandemic, the individual freedoms of one person can bump up against the freedoms of one another, right? So there's an evident issue here when we use this freedom framework, because freedoms can be mobilized for different aims that can conflict. And so we should move beyond this individual choice framework and move towards a rights framework that recognizes the contingency and value and interrelationality of all of these rights, and that children are embedded beings in the social world. So considering relationality in place of individualism allows us to think about and work towards this kind of common good in which the health of all is secured. So this framework can provide an approach that moves away from the physical school as the only space for learning, because as we know, we're kind of using it as a form of childcare here for the economy. So moving away from that model and instead recognizing that children can learn from various experiences in various places and with various beings. So community can therefore be found outside of the conventional classroom, and children's rights to education, health, and expression are all necessary and interrelated rights, and we cannot have one without the other. So while the Ontario government focuses on respecting individual choice, this is just an affront for neoliberal governance and restarting the economy by getting parents to work. So choice and freedom are not given, but provided in a way that creates the opportunity for adults to participate in the economic game. Through it all, children are excluded, they are fought over in their assumed best interest without ever being consulted. And this results in a complete denial of their experiences, continues to marginalize and silence them by recognizing only what they lack rather than what they bring. That's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sydney. Such a rich presentation, and I'm really so happy that you are presenting in this room to be able to listen to your presentation, because your topic is really so related to my direct study topic that I just started. It's how to reconnect children to nature in COVID-19, about outdoor learning and experiential learning. And it's so interesting is that when like each country, like all of the countries globally, they took the same safety procedures and they declared emergency all over, but each country has like different criteria for school reopening and this stuff. And then like when I see the public reactions on school reopening, like some of them like, we need our kids to go to school. This is what kind of quality our kids are having. They deserve the best quality of education. And then when they go to school, oh, we're scared. Our kids are like, they are you are jeopardizing our kids' lives and our lives when they get back home. It's really a huge dilemma because I don't know till when we gonna live in this situation, or like anything would be like, I don't know, helpful. But I do recommend that governments and educational institutions to push the outdoor learning more. It's not for the children only, it's also for everyone, because this like being locked down for a very prolonged time, it has huge issues on our mental health, physical and everything. It's not about the virus only, and economic wise too. So it's such a great topic. It's like I don't know, so many things to talk about, but at the same time, like not that much of research you find out there that caring about nature. Like it's all about virtual technology, all
right.
stuff, and it makes me really sad. It's like nature is a part of us, us, and us is nature, and like we can't stay alive if nature is not there. So it's not about, technology is great, being like adapting to this virtual life is great, but it's not us. It's not how human beings are created. So yeah, it's a great thing. So
yeah, I agree. I think they definitely didn't put enough thought into these kind of alternative methods, right? Or alternative programs that they could have used. And I think that's what you're highlighting as well, is that I feel anyways, they kind of just rush into getting back to normal as soon as possible. And that was a really ineffective and problematic decision.
Yeah, I don't know what normality anymore. Hopefully to get back to normal, but I don't know. Like we are living in a huge certainty, but we keep hoping, because hope is the core of our like stay alive. Thank you so much, Sydney, for your time. All the best in your further research and everything. I hope to see you soon again next year.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
And I'm studying youth suicide prevention through the perspective of belongingness. And in this presentation today, I hope to get into a little bit of the experience of some of the participants that I've been in conversation with, and hopefully outline some practices that can be used in a caring encounter in the future with someone who might feel like they're standing at the edge. So the question that I want to extend to you is, how do we inspire hope to youth who want to end their life? I found in doing this research that I don't need to go very far to find people who are impacted by either mental health, but especially suicide, whether it's suicidal thoughts or loss. But I found it really helpful to bring a frame of hope around everything I do. And so this is the question that I'm constantly coming back to in my work. There's a lot of sobering statistics around youth suicide, especially now during the pandemic. It's the second cause of death for young people in Canada and America, and it's the third worldwide. And we're only seeing a rise, especially in the last 18 months or so. There are lots of proposed prevention variables on the table that people are looking at in the world of suicide prevention. And the one that caught my attention in a book I picked up, written by a man named Tom Joyner, is this idea of belongingness. And I should say Dr. Joyner. Dr. Joyner has a very elegant theory when it comes to suicide prevention. He essentially states that there are two variables that bring the ship down, that cause somebody to find themselves standing at a bridge. And one of those is feeling like they're a burden, and the other is feeling like they don't belong, feeling a sense of isolation and loneliness. And between the two, belongingness, Joyner asserts, so long as belongingness stays kindled, the will to live remains intact. So I'll go into a little bit of, I guess, defining what this means, but there's something here Joyner's pointing to, and that this is exactly what I want to explore in my work. There's sort of two pieces of belongingness. One is having a sense of frequent and positive relationship. The other is that these relationships are reciprocal and they're stable. And when we don't have these things, we have a sense of low belongingness or lack of belongingness. This is what we have in place of a definition in the suicide field for this construct of belongingness. But when we look beyond the field of suicide, we see a really wide opening of what this means. One of my favorite definitions of belongingness is a sense of at-homeness. And people can belong to their cats, or you can belong to a space, or you can belong to a purpose, or you can belong to, you know, a divine being. But in the field of suicide, it's very much concerned with this sense of interpersonal relationships that matter to you. Now, one of the struggles within the field of suicide research and looking at belongingness is belongingness has largely been researched through a quantitative lens, using a 9-item subscale that was developed by Joyner and some other theorists who are kind of early pioneering in belongingness. So I reached out to Dr. Joyner several years ago, and I asked him what possible worth would a qualitative perspective bring into understanding how belongingness fits into this enigma, this puzzle. And he said, this is what you should look into. You should look into the searing loneliness of suicidal desire, the kind that seeps into the bones. And he talked about people coming to many of his public lectures and having a son or a friend or a sibling who had passed, and they said, we don't understand. They had a family, they had a soccer team, they had a wife, they had kids. How is it that somebody could feel that lonely? So I sought to look at belongingness in a really contextualized way, in a life course perspective, one that takes in stories and listens for the thin spaces in someone's life where there's a window of interest, a moment of interest where belongingness had a role in somebody's narrative. This is a drawing that I made that helps kind of show a little bit of the pathway of what I've been looking at in my research and my work. And of interest, you'll see this gap between these two parabola looking lines, and the space in between that gap is exactly where I am interested in. This searing loneliness. You have people around you who say, I'm here for you, I care for you, but the person who's feeling their darkest day says, I am alone. And so what is this experience? And are there any windows in this gap where any spark of hope or any spark of connection could rise? And so that's what I've been listening for, and that's what I've been exploring. This has been a handy methodology to do my work in. It's called interpretative phenomenological analysis. I've worked very hard to say that fluently. There are specific elements of this. I won't go into detail into this methodology, but it really shines a light on allowing individual voices to shine and to bring individual voices together to create something collective. You might think of this as like a tapestry weaving, where you can look at a tapestry and see all of these different colors, and you can still find the one thread and trace it throughout the full piece. So to keep it in the context of my participants, I can find the Matt thread, if Matt's a participant in my study, and I can see how Matt's story enmeshes and intertwines with the others. So I'm in the home stretch of my dissertation, and I have found 20 youth from around the world who have either survived a suicide attempt or at least had a past episode with serious suicidal ideation. And I've wanted to gather story in a number of ways. Primarily, I sit down with them for about an hour and a half or 2 hours to listen, and to, some people call it an interview. It feels more like a conversation. Then I invite them to bring another from their life, from their belonging tapestry, the people that they connect to, and we have this three-way conversation around a moment, a memory, and that's a whole nother lens of meaning making that I've found powerful. And in a couple of weeks, I've sent out an invitation for whoever wants to join to come in a group conversation, a focus group, to see what meaning is made there. So that gives you a little bit of context of the work I'm doing. Oh man, time is flying. Okay, so we're gonna skip ahead. So what I hope to do in the next couple of minutes is I'm going to just tell you some quick stories of what I've been listening to. And these stories point to practices of what educators and anybody in a school building or a university might take on to care for somebody who is in this place of feeling searingly alone. Here's one story. Lavender, these are, every name that I use is a fake name of a participant in my study. Lavender loved drama, and Lavender was involved in musicals in high school. And after one musical, it was late, 10:30 p.m. Lavender was in the boys' changing room, shuffling around some costumes. And the drama teacher came around the corner. And Lavender is feeling very much at his edge, and he is visibly sobbing. The drama teacher pokes his head around, and he says, what are you doing here? And there's this long pause and silence, and Lavender's just in tears. And the drama teacher says to Lavender, turn out the lights when you're done, and leaves Lavender in his own darkness in this moment in the changing room. That's one short story. The words that you see on the screen now are a poem that were written by a participant, Julie, when she was in high school. This was a poem that she handed to her English teacher. I'll read a few lines in case you're a listener or reading your screen is not available to you. But she talks about sitting in a bathtub that's growing colder and colder, and she can't feel the edge of her skin. And she says in this poem, "This lukewarm bathwater sends goosebumps down my legs, shivers up my spine. I remember a time not long ago when the water was warm, maybe even hot. I remember a time when everything was warmer." And then in the poem, she talks about getting coffee with friends and holding hands with her boyfriend. "But now, in this lukewarm bathwater, my damp hair sticks to my bare back. Everything has gone stiff. Everything has gone cold." And in our conversation, Julie said that the English teacher wrote in her yearbook saying, "You need to take greater risks in your writing." And Julie's thinking, why haven't she called the police? I'm telling you something that no other soul in the galaxy knows. And you haven't said anything to me about what I'm going through. You haven't asked me anything about what I'm going through. She also wrote her chemistry paper on antidepressants. And there's several other ironies in her story that come up that might come up later if time permits. But definitely a window of care that was missed by somebody who this student was close to. I'll end on this last story that I'll tell you is a student called Jazz. They use they, them pronouns. And Jazz had a really rough time finding a caring adult to plug into, to anchor onto for any sort of hope or stability. They caused a lot of fights in school, in middle school, elementary school, wrestling with their own darkness, hoping that somebody would do something, but instead teachers and people who were monitoring in recess on the playground just asked them, "What's wrong with you?" instead of doing something more constructive about it. So one day, Jazz in high school went to their nurse office and went into the nurse and told the nurse, "I'm sad all the time and I want to die." And the nurse said, "Well, we can do something about this. I can take you to the hospital." And Jazz said, "Yes, please take me." And I think I have it here. Let's see. Jazz talked about how this nurse was the only person that heard them and actually took them to the hospital, which is exactly what they wanted to happen. Somebody needed to take the step for them before they could step into a place of healing and help. And in the hospital, the nurse stayed with Jazz as long as the nurse could. I see myself running quickly out of time. Ooh, there's a raised hand. Maybe I'll let this linger in the air and open this up to questions. And then if no one has questions, I can go into more of some of the pieces that I see in here that can be translated to care. But I'll open the floor up to see what people might be thinking.
Sure. Tiffany, you have a question, right?
Yes, this was one of the presentations that I really wanted to attend. You know, I've been running around all day, but I made sure that I really wanted to see this. And I'm happy that I did see your presentation, Matt, because I feel very strongly for your topic. It touches me inside because I have experienced some of the things that you are discussing. And I think it's so so critical that we listen to when our students or when even anyone comes to us with these these words or who opens up to their story, we need to accept them and listen to them, because that is the critical moment that can make a huge difference in these people's lives. Sorry, I'm getting very emotional, but it just really touches me very strongly. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks.
Yeah, I do agree with Tiffany. Like, your presentation, Matt, is one of the best. It's really touchy and so important, because people kind of avoid talking about suicide and not confessing that it's one of our biggest issues nowadays, more than ever before. And when you talk about belongingness, I always like say, even sometimes if you are home in your country, among your family members, friends, everyone, and you still don't feel that you belong to anywhere. And even if you are like for me personally talking, I'm not home, my family is away, I'm alone, but I don't know, it's like, it's so harsh, especially nowadays with the pandemic. It's like, it's like I'm totally by myself. Okay, I have friends and they are like my family here, and they are always there for me, there for them no matter what. But the thing is that sometimes it's like belongingness is something you feel it inside. It's like nobody can tell you where you belong. It's something you feel, and even if you don't feel that you belong to anything here, as you said, it's like I may belong to the galaxy, for example, or any space. It's something, I don't know, really spiritual that some people can't touch it. It's like, I don't know if I'm delivering my point, but thank you so much for this. And I hope that you continue and do more and more, and others would build on what you are doing. And thank you from the heart.
Merci.
I don't know if anybody has any questions. If no, we still have 3 minutes if you want to. Oh yeah, Nicola, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for your presentation. I kind of echo everyone else by saying it's such a timely topic, especially now with the pandemic and everyone sort of finding it a challenging time mentally. I'm not sure if you can answer this in the space of 3 minutes, and perhaps my question is a big question, but you know, I've often heard this saying or the distinction between feeling alone versus feeling lonely, or being alone and feeling lonely. And I'm wondering if you got at that piece in your research. And another piece of my question is, well, I teach a child and development course, so I've been trying to keep up with some of the research concerning teenagers specifically. And where teenagers often struggle is when there's some form of transition in their life, moving schools, family changes, etc. Would you say that also perhaps drives some of these feelings? Yeah, so that's my two-part question. Thank you.
Yeah, 100%. So I do think there's a difference between loneliness and being alone. And I think being alone sometimes propels loneliness, and sometimes for some people won't. And that's a nuance. And so one image that my participants gave me was a solar system of connection, that he saw everyone as their own individual planets careening through the galaxy. And he used this metaphor. The context of this was at a funeral of a friend who took his life. And in this moment, he talked about that everyone in there was the solar system of connection, and the planets were aligned just in that moment, and there was connection, and everyone knew exactly what the other person felt. And I think that analogy is really helpful in thinking about loneliness and being alone, because you could be in your own orbit, having your own gravitational flow, but still feel very connected with somebody who's on the other side of the globe or the other side of the universe. And there's a lot of factors that go into the balance of the galaxy, but those are so unique to each person. And the best thing that you can do as far as from a sense of care is to be with that person and to sit with them and to get to know their universe and to be a part of that universe. And so much, like, it's not about having the right words, it's about being with people and understanding how they how their solar systems of connection work and move, and how you have a place in there. And I don't know, that visual is very helpful for me in thinking about belongingness.
So our time is up, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Matt, for this crucial presentation and your contribution. And we look forward to having you next year too. Hopefully it's gonna be in person. I don't know if you're gonna make it, but we always hope for the best. Thank you so much, and all the best in your dissertation and everything.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thanks for attending, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great morning and day. Good afternoon to you, Leila. How are you doing?
Thank you, fine.
And also, I'm so happy that you are presenting here, because the topic is so related to it. See, it's like, you know how we are.
My name is Leila Refai. I'm a master's student in art education program at Concordia University. And today I want to present my master thesis study supervised by Dr. Lori Belay, and entitled Curriculum of Climate Justice, Transforming Environmental Knowledge through Socially Engaged Art Practice. I will explain about the importance of the research, background theoretical framework, and methodology of study. And since the study is ongoing, I still cannot give accurate information about the study results. Okay. This study aims to investigate the function of art education, creative practice, and dialogue making in the learning setting, and use these capacities to create experiences to transform adults' environmental awareness. My objective is to propose a set of novel designed methods that can be used in both art education and environmental education. I want to start my presentation with a quote by American author Richard Buckminster. He said, "If success or failure of this planet and human beings depends on how I am and what I do, how would I be and what would I do?" Indeed, how will each of us behave if we perceive these questions deeply? We are at a critical historical stage with an environmental crisis that threatens life on Earth. Climate justice is an essential and fundamental matter. The year 2020 began with the echoes of several alarm signals linked to the environmental crisis that have appeared worldwide. Mostly, we can mention the global health crisis caused by the COVID-19, which more than ever reveals the need for profound change in the interpretation of the human role on Earth in relation with other species. The urgent need to raise environmental awareness have long been one of the most critical concerns discussed by environmental researchers and educators who emphasize the necessity for a deeper connection with nature to address the environmental crisis and promote learning. Innovative studies in education can lead to usable knowledge about and reform of instructional practice. Due to the complexity of learning, teaching, and knowledge production concept, I have, excuse me, I used art to improve communication and synthesis of complex issues in this study. Since 2012, environmental issues and endangered animals have been the main focus of my works as an artist. During my artistic activities in 2017, I held a 3-session workshop in a school in Vasa, Finland. And the workshop was a participatory project in which students and I conducted an origami installation that has a critical view of the fur farms and leather industry. I titled this project Bear's Farm, and it was a metaphor for the freedom of captive animals in these farms. After that, I implemented the same projects in Germany and Iran, and each session came with something new for me. How, for example, how the children perform and interact, their eagerness to create artwork, and the conversation that they had with each other after the work and after the art practices. What happens there all amazed me. And during the last project in Yazd, Iran, one of the children took off his leather shoes and told his friend, "I can no longer wear these shoes." All of these made me more eager to study and research the role of art in raising environmental awareness. The central question that has arisen through my experiences and studies is both pedagogical and pragmatic, and it is: how can creative responses to environmental issues provide a space to create ecological knowledge through the art making in dialogue? The theoretical framework of my research is supported by transformative learning, art-based environmental education, and socially engaged art. Transformative theory explains how transformative learning occurs, what transformative learning is, and how it develops. The transformation points to the process of questioning previously uncritical assumptions, values, benefits, and perspectives. It results in a constant shift in persons' views toward perception, inclusiveness, openness, and acceptance of other ideas and reflexiveness. All learning calls for change, but not all learning is transformative. According to psychologist and educator Jack Mesorov, the keys to bringing about transformative learning are the disorienting difficulties, critical reflection, and thoughtful discourses. Applying or experiencing one or all of these elements may lead to transformative learning. Transformative learning occurs when an adult engages in activities that cause or allow them to see a different worldview, then integrate it into and enlarge their own worldview. Throughout this study, I inquire if transformative learning can happen due to a deepened understanding of knowing the world and conscious connection with nature. To be more clear in my research and bring art and environmental education together in one undertaking, I situate this study in the contemporary art-based environmental education approach. Finnish author and educator Mary Helga Manter first developed this specific educational approach in the 90s, based on artistic perspective. Art-based environmental education does not simply integrate art to provide aesthetic experiences. Instead, art is the main point of connection to nature. She puts a high value on art in environmental learning and believes by artistic activities, the sensitivity and responsibility to the environment can be raised. Through the artistic process, she suggests that humans' connection with nature can develop in more imaginary, symbolic, and psychological levels, leading to deeper meanings and connections. Here, art is a form of environmental education. Art is not a tool, but instead is an essentially valuable activity. By studying and defining environmental art, we can suggest 4 types of exercises. The 4 categories are exercises on focusing on observation and more sensitive perception, exercises which expose natural phenomena to attention, exercises aimed at changing their environmental observation, and exercises that question environmental and human limits. Aiming to develop ecological knowledge in this study, I applied the theory of art-based environmental education in an adult-focused learning setting using the interactive tools of socially engaged art. Creative responses requires active engagement. As a participatory approach, socially engaged art is an approach that seeks to add diverse forms of art and storytelling to develop research activities in action. This method's characteristic is its dependence on social communication as a factor of its existence, and the facilitation of dialogue between communities. This method requires a high degree of reflexivity and is not without restrictions. From a pedagogical viewpoint, such approaches are set to provoke thought, discover something different in the process, and represent potentialities for creating artistic responses as symbolic social action. Socially engaged art can support studies connected with cultural issues and social structure and raise awareness and knowledge. This project provides a participatory space for participants to experience problem-solving techniques, the power of collaboration, and the constant influence of creative action. To develop my inquiry in a flexible and balanced procedure, I ground my study on a design-based research methodology framework. By designing and conducting art workshop with socially engaged art methods, I provide a shared space for participation, for participants to create, learn, converse, and engage freely in the research process. I conducted my study in 3 cycles, and these 3 cycles take place following iteration, including analysis and exploration, design and construction, and evaluation and reflection. I designed workshop considering socially engaged art methods focused on ecology and environmental issues. I invited in my workshops, I invited volunteers to participate, and due to the COVID-19 pandemic limitations, I use Zoom to hold online workshops. For each session, I designed an art practice regarding today's global environmental issues, and during each session, each workshop session, after showing participants artwork, we will make dialogue together about artworks, about participants' experiences, concerns, and observation during the artistic activity. I observe each session's process, collect data, analyze them, replan, and run the next workshop. As there are no outline for conducting the design-based research method, and fieldwork steps are unpredictable, Due to the diverse variables, many methodological decisions in this approach had to be made and be remade during the time in the field. In conclusion, I can say when society's dominant culture is influenced by consumer culture, engaging learners with environmental knowledge is challenging for educators. In this situation, art and art education can be centered as an advantageous and productive method for engaging learners in an interactive dialogue, challenging stereotypes and norms, and changing words perception. Maxim Green, the art theorist who supports aesthetic pedagogy, defines the experience of artistic practice and understanding the meaning of these experiences to connect learners with and to the world. Art provides a context to engage in a co-creative dialogue with nature and culture. Artistic activities enhance environmental sensitivity, inquiry, creativity, and imagination. This process can transform thinking and learning and help rebuild connections with the biotic communities where we are main part. Okay, I want to finish my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Leila, so much for your presentation and the great topics and the methods you have.
Thank you.
I don't know if anyone has any questions. I would like to comment on something really important that you mentioned. It's about imagination and creativity. Like these two components are so important, especially in childhood. Because I believe that each child comes with an instinct, creativity, and tendency. And if we do not nurture them and develop them, if we do not pay attention to them as teachers at that age, they would lose them. And then we would, at other stages, elementary school or other levels, we would keep asking, like, what's wrong with these students? Because we, like, this is one of the issues and the dilemmas that we keep facing. So we have to really pay attention to these things and really encourage all of the children, their parents, the administrations in all the institutions to connect children to nature, to be creative, to dare to be creative, because most of us, we are scared to be creative because creativity makes us different. And being different, it means that societies would look at you in a different lens and they would point at you that you are an outsider or something. So it's like a lot of stuff you have to be ready for as educators. And yeah, I don't know, like what else to say. It's like, it's a huge, and like it touches me a lot because personally I love nature and I love children, and looking at children nowadays, it makes me feel so sad and angry because it's like for us adults, we can't handle this lockdown.
Yeah.
Like poor for them, because they are missing a lot. At least we lived our childhood. We were
exactly
on the streets till a very late hour without even our parents having that kind of fear, or like you have to be back, because I don't know, life changed in I don't want to be pessimistic or something, but things change a lot. That we're like, we are now more scared to go out for a late hour, even if you're an adult and you know where you're going, but you feel unsafe to walk alone or do this or that. So it's really something that more research has to be done.
Yeah, exactly.
I wish you all the best from my heart, Leila.
Thank you so much for your comment. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I wanted to say a lot, but you know, sometimes when you have a lot to say, you just like end up like
No, it was very inspirational. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Leila. So yeah, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
We have 2 minutes before ending the whole.
Yes.
And go to the main room. So if you have anything to add, go ahead.
Thanks everyone for participating and listening to my presentation.
Thank you. That was our pleasure. And thank you for being here today. And for
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so
it was
much.
my pleasure.
Hope to see you all, our great attendees, to the main room, because we have the last webinar, the last keynote speaker, and she's one of the best, Susan Brigham. So it's really great being there and listening to her.
Yeah.
So see you there.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you
a great day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. See you. Bye.